Hello, my name is Stephanie Kidd. I'm the math consultant here at KVEC. We are going to talk today about the math standards. In this, we are going to build an understanding of the Kentucky Academic Standards for Mathematics. We're going to look at the document also and where you can find that. We're going to strengthen the connection between the components of the academic standards for mathematics, and we're going to experience how the changes in the Kentucky Academic Math Standards is reflected in student experiences. To understand the architecture of the standards, we need to know that the standards for math content focuses on critical knowledge, concepts, and skills students need to acquire at each grade level. We also need to understand the standards for math practices, which allows our students to engage in the math content. In K through 8, we look at the grade level overviews at the beginning of each grade level. These focus on the standards breakdown and includes a grade level domains and clusters. In the high school, we look at conceptual categories. These also, instead of being grade level, are focused on the standard breakdown that includes domains and clusters. High school teachers, the overviews of the domains and clusters are given within the conceptual categories, such as algebra, geometry, probability, and statistics. When you're looking for the Kentucky Academic Standards, you want to go to kystandards.org, and you will find there that when it opens up, it looks like this. There is a little plus button here that we are going to, that you're going to look at. This provides you the opportunity to do the newsletter. So when you're looking at that, you may want to do the newsletter. Your KY standards are here. So you'll click here, and you will see that we have the math standards right here. There's also standard resources at this point, and the resources for mathematics are here. So these are important for us. Now, as you're going through this, like I said before, this is the place where we'll find the newsletter. This is where we will find our Kentucky Academic Standards. And here is where we can explore our standards also. So clicking either of these places, we'll get that. Your resources, of course, is right here. And when we look again, this is the Kentucky Academic Math Standards. The great thing about the way our standards is laid out is now they have like a table of content in which if you were looking for a particular grade level or a category, you can actually click on these. And so if I'm looking at fourth grade, I can click on the fourth grade overview, and I will go straight to all the fourth grade standards. It begins, of course, with the overview and then dives into the standards in general. Now, in our case, we are taking fourth grade today. How can I use this? Well, if we're looking at this overview, I can use this in many ways. I can first get an understanding of all the things my students need to know this year. It can also turn into helping me to write my goals and objectives for the year for my students and what they need to do in mathematics. Another thing that I can look at is down here, the critical areas and how they focus. These, again, can help you to write your goals for your students and help them to understand what they need to know. I, after grades 4th and on, use this to let my students know what's expected of them. I also give this out at open house. And the reason I do that is so that my parents will know what's expected of their child by the end of the year. And can they do what is required by the Kentucky standards? Now, when we look at a standard in general, we notice that it has the domains. I particularly picked fourth grade because there's some notes that happen in fourth grade that we really want to make sure that we understand. Like in this case, of course, our academic standard or domain that we have is number and operations in base 10. When we think about that and we look at the bottom, it says recognizing a multi-digit whole number. Well, where does those whole numbers need to stay? It says they are limited, if you notice the note, to whole numbers less than or equal to 1 million. So I shouldn't be going over that when I'm having my problems created. Now, that right there, that note is very important, especially when we get to fractions, and we'll see that. It has our standards for math practices. They're on every cluster of standards. So we also have the cluster here. In this one, it is generalizing place value and understanding the multi-digit whole number. The other thing that I like to point out with these is, if you're noticing here, it has the coherence. The coherence allows me to jump back. In this case, this is the standard we're looking at. It allows me to jump back to where this standard connects to in previous grade levels. In this case, it is the Kentucky second grade number and operations of base 10 and number 1 standard. So that's what that tells me I would be jumping back to if my students are not understanding this, to see what they may be missing. Now, it allows me to jump ahead and see the standard that this is going to flow into, because math is a progression. We know this. We have to have every grade level, and they have to understand it to be able to flow to the next grade level. So we can look at what they need the next year to make sure we're getting everything we need to for this year. The other good thing about these standards is they have what we can teach together. If you notice here, we have a 4th grade standard that actually is, we can teach them together. And we can click on those and we can see what we can teach together and what we should be teaching together. So that's why I like these. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more later about the standards for math practices. You will see them every time here. The other thing is, it has a part to the standard that is attending to the standards for math practice. And you'll notice that this one says, well, we're going to use MP7. That's the one we're really going to look at for this one, which is look for and make use of structure. In this case, we may not always have just one of them. As you notice here, it has MP2 and MP7. Now, in many cases, even with these standards, there's going to be other ones we're going to look at. And you may do at any point in time. So we want to make sure that we understand that. So in this case, MP7 says we're going to look for and make use of structure. And if you look down here, we're going to start right here, which students make the conceptual connection between place value and multiplying and dividing by 10, noticing when any digit is multiplied by 10, the place value of the digit moves 1 place to the left. And when the digit is divided by 10, it moves 1 place to the right. Beyond noticing this pattern, students understand this pattern exists because place value is structured this way. Now, that gives you an understanding of what we're looking for when we're attending to these math practices. The other thing that I love about this is it has clarifications. And in the clarification, it gives you an example of what we're looking for our students. This provides you many times with an example of the types of problems that we're going to be using, the different types of problems they may need at the time for that standard. So I love the clarification. That's new in our standards, and it's great. Again, this is a 4th grade fraction. So one of the things about 4th grade fractions that we want to look at is, of course, make sense. Well, in this one is there's a note again. We'll go with that. We note that the only denominators that we need to be using are halves, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, eighths, tenths, twelfths, and hundredths. So we should not be giving them denominators with 7. We should not be giving them denominators with 9, 11, or numbers in between from 12 to 100. In this one, we are hitting several different math practices. We are looking at 4, which is model with mathematics, which means we should be allowing our students to have different types of models available to be able to do fractions. The other one we're looking at again is looking for and make use of structure, but we're also looking for repeated reasoning. And in repeated reasoning, we're also looking for what? Patterns. So we want to make sure that they look for and express regularities in repeated reasoning. If we go down here, of course, to this, we are looking at which ones that we know that the students need. Oops, sorry. So in this one here, when we look at the coherence, we notice that there's not anything that we can teach together with it, but we also notice the fraction before and we notice the fraction after. So this gives us that opportunity. This one has a clarification in that students draw fractions and see equivalent fractions. So when we're going to model with mathematics, they're going to need to draw it out. They're going to need to be able to see it. They're going to need to see equivalent sizes that should be there. And they're going to understand the difference in the numerators and the denominators, even within the same size. So things that we want to look at. All right. The relationship status. The standards for math practices describes ways in which the student or the student practitioners of the mathematics should increasingly engage in the subject. It gives them the opportunity to grow and experience math all the way through elementary, middle, and high. The standards for math content are the balance. You have 3 areas that we look for in the standards for math content. We have procedural skill, conceptual understanding, and application. Procedural skill also goes with fluency. If we take a closer look at our standards for math practices, we know that we have 8. And in this, students should be making sense of problems and persevere in solving them. We need to make sure our students have strategies or skills in which they can persevere in solving. They don't give up. They don't quit. Math is all about learning, and it's about working through. So we want to make sure they can do that. Reason abstractly and quantitatively. We need to get them to where they can break things apart, put things back together with the numbers, and then understand why that's happening. They need to construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. And in this one, it means that we're going to have discussions in our classroom. It's not about just doing the math. It's about truly understanding it and being able to explain it. And that's why we want to be able to have viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. The other thing I love about this one is for critiquing the reasoning of others is things like my favorite no, the big mistake. Where did they find it? How do they know? And then, of course, we have model with mathematics. In modeling with mathematics, we need to make sure that we are looking at 3 things: the concrete, the semi-concrete, and the abstract. Now, concrete means I'm using manipulatives. And that's a great one that we need to make sure we keep in mind, that they're using a manipulative in some way. The other one is semi-concrete. This is the part that puts it in the brain. This is the part where the student is drawing and demonstrating on either a sheet of paper or somehow a whiteboard, those kind of things that demonstrates the understanding of the concrete. We tend to skip this as teachers, thinking that it's just a simple thing that they need to do. They've already seen it in the concrete. We can move on to the abstract. That's not true. This is the part that really puts it in the brain, and it has a big connection for our students in understanding. So we need to make sure that we're doing that. And then, of course, the abstract and tying that in. Number 5 is use appropriate tools strategically. Students should have a tool they can use, and they need to be able to choose the tool and strategically use it and explain it. And then, of course, math practice 6 is attend to precision. Knowing the accuracy, being able to estimate, knowing that I don't have the right answer because it's not looking right, feeling right. I know that if I estimate this, it should be somewhere close to this number instead. So having that understanding and being able to attend to precision, being able to look back at a problem and know that, oh, that doesn't look right, that doesn't feel right. I know that that's not correct. What did I do? And so going back to that, looking for and making use of a structure. Worked examples is a good way to do this for our students, for them to be able to see a structure. And then also being able to look for and express regularities and repeated reasoning. This is being able to understand patterns. Patterns in mathematics, there's everywhere that we have. And so making sure that we can look for that and express that regularity, the repeated reasoning, and the patterns that we see. Now, in our standards, there's also the section that I talked about earlier, which is the math resources. There's a lot of good resources that we have in mathematics, and there's several here that we would like to talk about. So in this one, the 2 that I want to look at is the Math Standards Implementation Guide, which actually has our look-fors. And we're going to talk about breaking down a standard. Another one that we're going to talk about later on is this part right here, which is using our math practices to integrate our social and emotional and academic development needs that we have in mathematics. So if you have any questions about social and emotional, this is an area that you can go to talk about how that is affected in mathematics. So let's look at our look-fors first. This is what it looks like. So I've just brought up one of these, but they have all 8. And it's the possible student actions that you'll see when they're doing this practice, which is make sense of a problem and persevere in solving them. And you'll see all the possible actions that we will have there. We will also see possible actions the teacher should be doing. So we're going to be providing rich problems and aligning to the standards. We are going to make sure we have appropriate time for students to engage in productive struggle. That's a big one for us, giving that wait time for them to struggle a little bit, but yet make sure it's productive struggle and not frustration. The other thing is providing opportunities for students to solve problems that have multiple solutions. And so giving those times. Now, the other thing is possible questions to promote. So we may ask, what information do you have? Sometimes a student doesn't know that, but we can start out with, what do you see? Because I can't be wrong about what I see. And so that will get me started in saying, this is what I see here. And then we can ask, well, what does that information do for you? And then these are, just like I said, just some possible questions that you can have that will help lead your students in the direction. Now, we're going to practice breaking down a standard. And in practicing breaking down a standard, we're going to look at 3 areas, just like I talked about before. One is conceptual understanding, and it refers to the understanding of mathematical concepts. And it's more than just isolated facts and methods. We're going to understand the why. We're going to see the importance of the context and how it's useful. We're going to develop an understanding that allows students to connect to, again, prior knowledge. As I've said before, mathematics is built on each other. So it is a continual progression. Now, we're also going to look as if that standard is procedural skill or fluency. And it's the ability to apply procedural accuracy, efficiency, flexibility, and appropriately. And we're going to build this into, again, speed and accuracy in calculations. Now, this has to be while given opportunities to practice. Students, we need to think about fluency as being, I need to be able to tell you about it. I need to be able to work through a problem and have some kind of opportunity in my head that's going to allow me, or procedure that's going to allow me to pick one and go through, and I can connect it again with other things. It works in multiple places. I can build on it with my prior knowledge. So we need to become independent, modeling of the task, and those kind of things to help with procedural skills and fluency. Again, how do we build fluency? It's with practice, not with time, but with practice. And practice needs to have corrective feedback often. Application is the next one, and that's the context of learning and the opportunity to solve problems that are relevant and meaning. We need real-world applications that students learn to select an efficient method to find a solution, and those solutions have to make sense and develop critical thinking. So think of those when we're thinking about applications. How is this developing our critical thinking? This is what it looks like when we look at breaking down a standard. Now, I'm not going to suggest this for every standard, but it's nice to be able to do this with 1 or 2, because then it gets you flowing and thinking about the things you need to do. So, of course, with our standards, we're going to first we're going to identify the target of the standard. Is it conceptual? Is it procedural skills and fluency? Or is it application? We're going to consider the target of the standard. What's going to be impacted in the instruction and the assessment? Now, I like to do the backward approach and create the assessment first, and then think about all the things that the student needs to do to be able to complete the assessment with 100%. And then what key mathematics should the student know and be able to do? Again, if I'm doing the backward approach and I've created the assessment that goes with that standard, then I know all the things that my students should have to be able to do to be able to get to that assessment with 100%. The other thing I like to put here is vocabulary. What's the vocabulary my students are going to need to know? Mathematics, again, is being able to critique and do a argument of it. So in that case, we need to make sure they have the vocabulary to truly argue their point. If we look at the clarifications, we look at specific representations that the student's going to use. What kind of modeling do we need to have? What strategies should I be talking about here when I'm considering this? And what strategies am I going to teach my students? So of course they have multiple strategies in their little wheelhouse to be able to pull from. And then again, what are the possible misconceptions my students may have during that instruction? This is important because I can also look at what are some prior knowledge that I need to make sure my student has, along with misconceptions. And then again, if we look at the coherence, we're going to look at the grade level before. Do they understand everything there? And right now, with us coming back from a pandemic and some other things that are going on, we need to make sure that our students have that prior knowledge, or do we need to build that first? And then how does the standard support future learning? So we look at the upcoming grade level and we say, okay, does our assessment get them to the point to where they would be ready for the next grade level? And then how does the standard connect to other standards that are there? So if we look at the current standard, is there anything that we can teach again with the same thing that we're doing right now? And then of course, attending to the SMPs is what's the engagement that the student's going to have in this content. So what are some things that I can really make sure my kids are engaging in? Real world examples, those kind of things that's going to help my student to understand the standard. Now, I'm just take a few minutes to look over the standard, go ahead and get out a breaking down the standard and see how you would write that up. This one right here, if we look at it, of course, we're going to see many different things, but take a few minutes to just break this one down, look at it, at what's there. And I always find that measurement and data is a great one to start with. So take a few minutes to do that. You can turn off your computer and just try to break it down. I'm going to go on and talk about the back of our standards. On page 254, you will start to see an appendices. And in that, it has some great opportunities. And most of the time, people don't go back here to actually look. So in the back, it has the common addition and subtraction situations that you will find. The thing about this is we tend to give our students questions that fall here when we should be giving our students questions that fall here. And so making sure that they have all this option to be able to do, and they are building up to it. We're going to start here, of course, and we should be, but we need to move on to when they've got a good understanding to questions that truly fall in here. Because this right here is what they're going to be seeing the most and what's going to be the most challenging. Again, with multiplication and division, we tend to fall here, which is unknown product equal groups, or group size unknown, and we do arrays. We tend to forget about the compare section and the number of groups unknown, which is where we really want them to be. So again, we will start here, but we need to make sure that we build up and they see a lot of these types of problems. The other thing you'll see in the back in the appendices is properties of operations and properties of equality. So these are some that you will see. These make great posters for your wall. You can use, and this is on page 258. Now, I want you to ask yourself, what are my resources? What are the textbooks I'm using, digital resources I may already have available to me, other resources that I may have in my classroom? Do I have manipulatives that I need to teach the different grade levels? So in fractions, do I have fraction squares? Do I have fraction strips? Do I have the opportunity for them to put their hands on the mathematics? Those are some questions you may want to ask yourself and make sure that you do for your students. And then again, get yourself comfortable with using those manipulatives. And then, is there a district pacing guide or a curriculum map or even an outline for the year? so that it allows you to continue the pace in which you need to be at. And then, of course, how well do I really know my my standards document? And also, how well do I know my standards in general? So looking at that clarification, going back and finding problems that specifically relate to my standards and using them. Those are just some questions that you need to ask yourself. And then again, for some feedback for this, please and thank you. I hope you enjoyed our little slideshow. Have a great day.